a discussion with Donnie Vincent. I'm Sam Meadow. I'm the outreach coordinator of the Badger Hunting Club. And we have been running these speakers virtually over the last year, unfortunately, due to COVID. But Donnie's our second speaker we have this semester. So the second part of our conservation series is what the club likes to call them. So I'll give the floor to Donnie to sort of talk a little about his background and where he comes from and what he does. And then I'll ask him a few questions, and then we're going to open the floor up to the audience to ask questions. The best way to ask a question is either typing it in the chat box, which will go to myself or Eric, our faculty advisor, and then we can read the questions to Donnie, or at the bottom right of your screen under the reactions tab, there is a raise your hand function. If you raise your hand, we can call on you and unmute you if that's a better way to, if that's a better way for you to ask your question. But yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for coming. Give the floor to Donnie.
Yeah, Sam, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invite. I'll keep my backstory short so that we can get to questions. And I'm sure most of the people that are here know a little bit about me. I've done a few interviews, magazine, and podcasts and things, but I have an academic background. I have a professional background. I have a background, of course, like all of us, of things that I'm interested in, but really everything around my life has been generated through wildlife, through loving being outside and really loving being around wildlife and doing all that I can to see them, to get in close to them, to study them, to hunt them. And so when I was younger, I did all that I could to get outside and find snakes and frogs and turtles. And then when I was old enough to kind of learn about hunting, I started diving and going down that road, and which led me to wanting to be a wildlife biologist, because again, I just wanted to be around wildlife and contribute, which led me into filming some of my hunts, and one thing led to another. But the backbone, the skeletal system of it all was just wanting to be around and seeing wildlife, whether that be little songbirds, reptiles, insects, plants. It's all completely fascinating. I mean, literally just before this call, I'm on 10 acres of woods here with my cabin, and I was walking around looking at wood ducks that are beginning to kind of pair up and go through their mating, and yeah, I almost forgot to come in here to do this. So it's basically my background.
So going into you becoming interested in hunting, did you come from a hunting family, or how did you spark your interest and knowledge and grow into becoming a hunter?
You know, I often lament that I don't come from a hunting family, and recently my mother kind of corrected me. My father, he always held, this is how I describe it, he held the kit of a hunter. He had a few hunting guns, a 12 gauge shotgun, a 243 center fire rifle. He had a 22. He had some hunting knives. He had a fantastic book collection, which is one of the things that inspired me to start traveling to Alaska and northern Canada and really spending a long time in places like the Arctic. But so I was around things that had the imagery of a hunter. I saw paintings and drawings, and I would pour through these books. I see my dad's guns and the walnut gun cabinet, his hunting knives, but he very rarely went hunting. And if he did, it was time spent with his friends. And but my mother recently reminded me that her dad, my other grandfather, of who passed away when I was very, very young, he would travel out west quite a bit and hunt antelope and mule deer. And my mother actually said when she was a little girl, she grew up in central Minnesota. She said it wasn't until she was getting a little bit on in life, probably 10, 11, 12, that she even really put together that they sold meat at the grocery store, she told me, because they ate so much fish, ducks, geese, mule deer, white-tailed deer, antelope, and she said even she remembers eating turtles quite often, and so that's the kind of the road they went down. And then she told me kind of a funny story about my dad's dad, my grandfather. He hunted a fair amount but as the story goes, he really just wanted to be around wildlife. So my mother just recently told me that he had a reputation of, he would go to northern Maine deer hunting every year with his buddies, but he never ever brought bullets. So he would literally just go there and walk around the woods with his rifle, and he wouldn't have anything in his gun just because he wanted to be around deer and bears and the moose and the grouse. So it turns out I come upon it quite honestly, but I was not introduced to hunting in a traditional fashion. My father wasn't necessarily taking me hunting, and I didn't really need that. I was motivated myself. I really wanted to go. I really wanted to hit the ground running. If I did go hunting with my dad, which was rare, it was me begging him, pushing him in the car, loading the guns up. Like it was me taking him hunting. The only thing I was missing was a driver's license.
Nice. That's a very cool story. So one of the main goals of our club, I guess, is really hunting recruitment on the UW Madison campus and trying to expose people that might not have been exposed to hunting before, offer them an outlet, whether it be learn to hunt or just coming and participating in club events, and just having their knowledge grown about the sport of hunting. And so one question I have for you relates to hunting recruitment in the sense that hunters can often be selfish and they don't want their favorite spot or fishing hole to be overcrowded, but yet hunting license sales also pay for the majority of the conservation funds in certain states. So I don't know what your thoughts are on about that, or if you'd like to elaborate a little more.
What are my thoughts on, should we be recruiting hunters?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, yes. I have several. I understand the greed of hunters wanting to keep their, their fishing hole wild, if you will, in their secret deer hunting spot quiet for themselves. I understand that need, but really, if you have any interest in mankind, if you have any interest in human beings overall, teaching somebody how to hunt and fish, bringing somebody camping, teaching them bushcraft and camping skills, and being able to hunt and fish for their own food, like that should just absolutely fill you full. Science shows, there's been quite a bit of science that's been people studying recently the effects of taking people out into the wilderness, particularly without their cell phones, for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. A dear friend of mine named Michael Easter, who has never hunted before in his life, not last year, but the year before, spent 8.5 weeks in Alaska with me. We went all the way from the Arctic Circle down to the Chugach mountain range around Anchorage in October, out to the Alaska Peninsula, and then way out near Russia on the island, Adak Island, at the end of the Aleutian chain. And he's writing a book called The Comfort Crisis. And the basis of this book was, he wrote a story about me a few years ago in Men's Health magazine. And when he was interviewing me, he asked me where I wanted to do the interview. And I said, well, you need to come on a hunt. That's where we'll do the interview, because then you can get a sense of my being and why I'm there. So he and it was him, a photographer named Justin Bastian, one of the world's best adventure photographers, and his assistant came along with my team, and I had 2 photographers and myself. So there's 6 of us. We were in Nevada, and I had those gentlemen hike up to 10,000 feet with me and hunt elk on a self-guided elk hunt. And it was there that, through him and I getting up very early in the morning and him asking me questions, and then all 6 of us stalking through the forest, getting up on bugling bulls and having to find water and carry our food in, and all the kind of elements that come with wilderness hunting. It was through that he was really started to feel empowered by the end of our trip. And he went and did a bunch of research for that article, which I recommend everyone reads. It's really, and I'm not saying because it's about me, but he did a lot of research on the effects of spending time in the woods outside without our cell phones, particularly that of an extended time of 2 to 3 days. Our creativity goes through the roof. Our cognitive abilities go through the roof, our ability to problem solve, our essentially like all of our indicators, whether it be our creative, our thought processes, our general IQs, to our happiness coefficients, to our self-esteems, to the prowess that we feel within our physical self, like our muscles and able to move weight. Everything skyrockets. Like within just a couple of days, we start to peel off these layers and start to really become human beings again. And so I think of all of that, and I think if talking hunter recruitment, even before just saying like, yeah, we got to get kids buying guns, we got to get kids buying licenses and going trout fishing and turkey hunting, like that is all very true, but it all has this basis of this physiological, psychological, and just a greater intrinsic effect on us as a human being, as an individual, as an animal. That is why I think you should want to cultivate hunting and fishing into an individual, and then that showing them, that filling their minds and their muscles full of blood and becoming engaged, that will translate into them wanting to pick up a fly rod or a recurve or a compound bow or a centerfire rifle and want to buy licenses and want to start to explore unexplained areas, which is going to lead them to want to engage with habitat and want to become conservationists and actually start to care about butterflies and start to care about all things, even mosquitoes and insects and plants and the soils, for God's sakes, the rhizomes. And we kind of like start to look at this earth as instead of belonging to us as human beings, because we're the ones with thumbs and we can fly airplanes and we have these big brains, rather than thinking that this earth belongs to us, to realizing that we belong, to this earth, that we're just another species, we're just another animal. We just happen to be so dynamic and so poisoned at times that we slip into these things of war, and we build up walls, and we segregate, and we kind of, lack of a better term, we really rip the land apart for our own benefits, and we think it's here to provide for us, and nothing could be further from the truth. We are part of it. So I think when you're talking about the realms of hunter recruitment, I say let's first recruit those people into wanting to be their best self, mentally, physically, physiologically, through camping, bushcraft, hunting, fishing, skinning an animal, cooking their own meat, procuring meat for their families and for their friends, and I think that's where hunting recruitment is vital for the existence of our species. Otherwise, we're going to be fat, and we're going to be sad, and we're going to be a former shell of ourselves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I wish more people would start hunting and do all that sort of stuff before they transition into a hunting role. But sort of going off that, you commented like no cell phones, really become one with yourself and with nature, and being aware. With cell phones obviously comes social media, and do you think, I know social media has its pros and cons with hunting recruitment and just the whole hunting industry in general. And I know yourself, you run a media company and have a very strong and good social media presence, but what are your thoughts on the negative effects to the benefits of social media?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the benefits are, to be honest with you. I mean, I guess it's sharing stories, it's staying in contact with. Maybe it's a little bit easier to stay in contact with family and friends and people you haven't seen for a long time. It's certainly a good way for companies to engage with their customers, but I think the benefits slip away pretty quickly beyond that. There is that social aspect of it, but really I think it's a massive degradation of our minds and of our self-imaging. Even my Instagram page is extremely sincere. I write every word that pops up there. All the photos are really of me doing the things that I say I'm doing, but I don't take a photo of me laying in my bed at night, staring up at the ceiling in complete madness, questioning everything that I've done in life, feeling like a complete failure, wondering if I even have the skills. If my company Segmanta melts away tomorrow, do I even have the skills to go out and get a real job and to actually enter the workforce again? Should I have to? You know, I don't take a photo of that and post that on Instagram. And so when people go on my Instagram, they're like, oh my God, this guy, you know, he lives in the wilderness. You know, he's probably skinning a beaver right now, or mounting a moose rack on his cabin wall. And you know, there's days in my life that that's true, and then there's many days in my life that that's not true. And so I think, like anyone else, right, we take photos when we catch a big walleye, or when a young lady is in a bikini at the beach in a paradise, or you know, there's this fascination with taking photos of our meals when we're out to dinner. And it's all these, you know, it's really positive things that we're doing, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're happy in those times that we're taking that slice of pie and taking a photo. And it has a degrading effect, I think, on on individuals, particularly people that seem to suffer every day of wondering who they are, or where they're going, or what they're doing, which I think is the majority of us. I certainly include myself in that. And so I think social media, for the most part, is a total degradation on human beings. I think, you know, I don't think we read books like we used to. I don't think we watch even movies like we used to. I don't think we have sex like we used to. I don't think we cook meals together like we used to, or take walks like we used to, or ride bicycles, or work together like we used to, or at least we do. If we do, it's with a different mindset, and our dopamine receptors seem to be so easily triggered with the things that we see, whether we want to see a girl wearing very little clothing, or we want to see a big whitetail buck, or if a young lady wants to see a guy who's absolutely shredded with muscles and is saying all the right things in his poetry that he's writing, or whatever. I don't care if you're into kittens or Ferraris. Like, it's, you know, it's an instant mind food, but there's nothing there. It's a house of cards. And so like, I enjoy the storytelling part of it for my life, but you know, that's what it is. It's an outlet for me. But you know, if everyone said, hey, you know what, we're not going to follow you anymore, we're going to go do something, that's fine. That's, you know, I want people to live their lives. Like, the clock is ticking. We are, like everything else, we live our lives under the idea of entropy, this continued state of disorder. The second we're born, we begin to die. And so you might as well live like like crazy.
Right. And yeah, that's a great answer. Kind of off that, let's say somebody doesn't hunt, or and is scrolling through Instagram, and they see their buddy or somebody they know posting with a buck, or a deer that they shot, or some ducks. Do you think that presence on social media, or that hunter, is turning them off from hunting, or do you think that is uh, inviting them to hunt? I guess that's sort of a weird way
I
to put it.
I highly doubt it's inviting them to hunt, although I have had hundreds of people, maybe thousands, probably thousands by now, of people email me that were anti-hunters, vegans, vegetarians, people that were hadn't really thought about hunting in 20 years or so, a whole group of people that weren't hunting. I probably have thousands of letters of people that said, reading your content, seeing your films, understanding why it is that you hunt is making me feel like I want to hunt. They don't want to shoot a 180-inch whitetail. They don't want to shoot the perfect bullseye with their compound bow in front of their buddies. That's, you know, there's a certain group of population, oftentimes young men, you know, young hunters, that will kind of fixate on those things. But these people, they love the idea of, you know, they say, well, I buy meat from my local rancher, my sustainable rancher. I buy chickens from my neighbor who they walk all over his yard, and I buy eggs from him. You know, and they start to kind of envelope this idea of well, geez, if I go down to the stream and catch a couple of trout, and now I pick the tomatoes out of my garden and I fry up a couple of eggs for my neighbor and I cook up my 2 rainbow trout, it's just another way for them to engage in the wilds and in their neighborhood and being outside and procuring food. And so I think you get this tick of individual people that want to engage more. They want to feel more alive, much like what I was talking about before, and increasing our physiology and our psychology. But I think it all depends on how we're writing the post for the animal, or if you're not writing anything, that's probably better. If you have not a single written word, that's probably better than a lot of the things that people are actually writing. I think our demeanor with those animals is one of the elements that people are kind of paying attention to. If you're sitting there with a big buck and you're either looking egotistical, like you dominated this animal, like it was me versus him. A lot of guys like to say that, which is just, in my opinion, gross. But I won, I beat him, I killed him. Or we're sitting there with a big smile on our face, which can be misconstrued, right? I'm not saying you can't sit there with a big smile on your face. We work very hard to train with our weapons. We work very hard on our physicality and our gear to go off into wild places, and to find a very large mature animal is quite difficult. They're a needle in a haystack. And then when you finally do find one and you nervously come to full draw and you execute on that shot and your arrow finds its place, or your bullet, quite rewarding. It's difficult not to feel a sense of warmth, but it's also extremely difficult not to feel an overwhelming, crushing sadness. And when you're sitting here with a big animal with a smile on your face, you're opening up for misinterpretation. And so I think it probably goes both ways. But all of this other nonsense that lives on social media, people putting ducks in their mouths. I've seen people with provocative poses with dead animals, with all of these different things that you kind of see. I think I wish we had more room in jails, because I'm a harsh man, but I would toss those people in jail and throw away the key. Like, I have no time. If you're going to take an animal's life, and you're going to degrade it like that, and you're going to degrade the situation and the realness of being a predator and that being your prey, then I have very little time for you.
Sure. Yeah. Great answer. I think, Eric, you said you had a question you'd like to.
Yeah, I got a couple of them, but I'll start with the first here, because you kind of alluded to this, that we have a pretty homogeneous population of hunters. They're typical white male. And yeah. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on recruiting people from a more diverse background, more women, more people of color, and how do we provide access to the great outdoors to those people? Because some of them come from much more concentrated regions, big cities and things like that.
Yeah, and I think but I think it's just actively something to pursue. I don't care if they're people of color or women, but let's just say people that live in the city or people that live in different geographical regions. But I think it's actually actively, and I don't do this, so I'm not. I'm being maybe hypocritical right now, but it's maybe organizing. But this is something that I would love to be a part of. But if I could go into downtown Chicago or downtown Minneapolis or St. Paul and round up, because you brought up race and diversity, round up 10 black kids, girl or boys, and just said, hey, we're going camping for 3 days, and we're going, I'll bring some provisions, but we're going to learn how to start a fire. We're going to camp out. We're going to secure our own food, and we're going to go and try to hunt and gather. Like, you would leave those kids with the most lasting impression possible. So it's just getting them to pop, and it's getting them into those places. And it's a real trip, though. That I think that's a big difference. It has to be something that's real. Like, you can't say, hey, I'm going to take you. Well, you can say, hey, we're going to go fishing this afternoon. And, that can spark it for a few kids and things like that. And, but I think doing like a little bit longer of a trip or something like that would be a little bit more immersible. But that's what it's going to take. Some of it has to come from them, right? They have to have this interest, or at least be willing to kind of open up their minds, whether it be young ladies or ethnic kids or even white kids that are in the inner city and have, like, they see one tree spaced out every 50 feet in a square that out of cutout concrete. But I think that's what it takes, is actively going and getting those kids. And I think every single one of those kids, if we could wave a magic wand and just say, hey, every kid in America has to go hunting for a week. It's part of getting their driver's license. It's part of, I think society would be vastly different.
Very interesting perspective. I'm wondering what your thoughts are related to how the current R3, I assume you're familiar with that terminology, recruitment, retention, and reactivation programs that are out there. And some of this is actually in the news recently from other folks. Where should they be spending their money in regards to these types of issues?
Yeah, that's a great question, and not one that I have an answer to. As far as other organizations to be putting their money into, or to set up programs, perhaps do something fresh from the ground up, and create a curriculum, or create a group that will take these kids and immerse them into wild places, or take these kids, whether it be something short term like we just discussed, or something that's going to be long term, a night or two, or 3 nights, something like that. But I don't know, and forgive me about not catching. I'm really not that up to date on the news. I don't have a TV here, and spend little time looking at the current news, which is not something necessarily to be celebrated, but a reality in my life. But yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure where they should spend their money, and finding areas to spend money these days is difficult in and of itself, just because of who's doing what with the money is becoming murkier and murkier all the time. But I would think that there could be some really great, especially if somebody wanted to spearhead it, I'm sure there'd be some really great recruitment opportunities. And I wonder, and I'm not educated on it, but I wonder if, Ducks Unlimited has aspects of this, or the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, or the Rough Grouse Society, Trout Society. I wonder if these groups, National Wild Turkey Federation, I wonder if these groups, I'm sure are delving into some of this recruitment, but I wonder if they're taking, I wonder if they're really seeking out kids, like inner city kids, diversity, finding girls, or if they are just taking like their owners or their members' kids that already are kind of being immersed in this lifestyle. I wonder if that's the people that end up going, is, these people that kind of come to the National Wild Turkey Federation banquet, if they just end up taking the kids that are already kind of at this banquet, and have the ability to sign up, or if they actually go into the inner city. That'd be really interesting to go into the inner city, whatever that means, a rec center, whatever, and like sign these people up. A real quick story, and this has almost nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I ended up befriending a gentleman from Trinidad years ago, and he was a very dark black man, and he just kind of asked me. I worked with him. He asked me what hunting was like, and he was always wondering what I was running off to do, and so I said, "Oh, I'm going duck hunting this weekend," and he said, "Can I come?" And I said, "Sure." And I got him a gun, and we went out and shot clays, and it was I was entertained. If I'm being honest, I was entertained even taking him in to buy his hunting license, because he bought our hunting license at Gander Mountain, I think. And I mean, this guy, his skin was dark, and just seeing the clerk selling him a hunting license, I could see he hadn't sold a hunting license to a guy that looked like this in a very long time, if ever. And we went duck hunting in the morning, and that guy hunted every day for ducks, as far as I know, the rest of his life. I'm sure he still is. Like, he started going, I got him permission on a couple of farms that I hunted on, and he would just text me or call me, and he would just go hunting literally every single morning.
That's a cool story.
Yeah, that's a very awesome story.
Yeah, that's great.
He was great, and I put black face paint on, and then he would put white face paint on because his face was so dark. We looked like clowns.
That's funny. Bennett, I think you had a question you wanted to ask.
Yeah. Hey, Donnie. Thanks for coming and talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, hey Bennett.
My question is, hey, what inspires you to tell the story of hunting, and what inspires you to go out every day or whenever you do go out and do what you do?
I wanted to tell the story originally. I think it was probably lack of a better term, but it was probably all wrapped around ego. Not ego in the sense of my self-esteem, but ego in the sense of I was hoping that that sharing this with people, like going out and going on my hunting trips and seeing the thing. I shouldn't say ego. It was maybe a celebration of self, or something. Like as I was going out on hunting trips, I would see these amazing things, caribou or an elk or even deer, painted turtles, wood ducks, whatever. And, I was always very enthusiastic, and I come home and I tell my parents or I tell my friends, and I'd see them just kind of like, yeah, that's neat. And, to me, I was like, oh no, you're not getting it. Like I saw this, I see this before I really understood what warblers were, right? These little birds that we see in the spring and in the early fall as they're migrating through. Well, if you're not paying attention, you don't ever see any of these little birds, but they are they are as brightly colored as parrots, some of them. And so I'd see some of them in the forest, and I'd look them up in my bird book. And it was just freaking me out that I'd lived my whole life in a particular area and never really saw, an American redstart. Then all of a sudden one morning I'm sitting there and I see an American redstart go by, and I'm actually able to glass him, look it up, and I think I literally found a space alien. But so that was my inspiration to start filming some of these things, is just showing people one-off events, a grizzly bear, a fish swimming by. But then I started doing a journal in the morning. I take the camera and say, yeah, it's the second morning. I'm 50 miles north of Kotzebue in the Arctic Circle. It's cold this morning. And I started just kind of telling the story. And when I played it for people when I got home, I just saw how engaged they were. Like they were finally really engaged and asked me questions. Their enthusiasm was raised up like my own. And so then I found guys through a series of events. I found guys that were really talented with cameras and wanted to come along. And then, I wrote a couple of pieces for these stories, and a guy that I held in very high regard, really talented filmmaker, storyteller. He's like, man, you're really good at writing. He's like, I really enjoy your writing. And I attribute that 100% to my professor, of which I don't remember her name, so I feel terrible, that taught freshman English at the University of Minnesota, because I would write stories for her and I'd hand them in, and she's like, these are garbage, Donnie, this is terrible. Like, you're telling me everything that I should be feeling in the story. You're literally telling me every little scene. She said, don't do that. Tell me nothing. Paint me a picture. Paint me every little detail. Let my mind go there. Let me tell the story to myself through your writing. So I was like, oh, I totally get it. And so I started writing stories for her like that. And she was just like, you are very gifted at this. She's like, you're an excellent storyteller. So I started combining all these elements. And then a friend of mine said, you should make a movie. And I said, no, I shouldn't. And they said, no, you should. Like, you should make a hunting movie. And I said, no, I shouldn't. He said, no, I really think you should. I think you could do something beautiful and sell it. And I thought, no, there's no way. And so they finally convinced me to give it a go. And so I did. And it was really funny because I was sitting with my editor, who's still my editor, Kyle Nicolite, and we were coming up with pieces of this film. We went and filmed this piece. The Rivers Divide is our first film. It took 2 years of us filming in North Dakota. And when I finally got around to writing the film, I wrote the first few pieces for it, and I handed it to him. And he's like, this is horrible. It's like, I've never even heard you talk like this. And it was very egotistical. The writing was very macho and egotistical. And I was just kind of mimicking things that I had heard on outdoor television. He's like, no, I want you to write like you talk. When you talk about the sadness that you feel when you're hunting, and the difficulty that it is to come home from trips, and the difficulty that it is to be home and not outside, even if it's in your yard. And I don't mean like throwing a football around in your green grass. I mean walking through the woods, looking for mushrooms, birding, hunting, fishing, whatever. And so I wrote it my way, and I thought, we're going to get attacked, man. Like, we are going to get ripped apart. And we didn't. Everyone from the stereotypical Bubba, with the jacked up pickup truck and cranking country music, loved it, to people that were 100% against hunting, loved it. I certainly got some critiques. Not everyone loved it, but by and large, the majority certainly did. And it was just very motivating to me to do another one. And to, it takes zero inspiration for me to get outside. Like very little inspiration for me to get up before the sun rises, even outside of hunting or fishing season, and to sneak outside on my deck here and just kind of watch the world come to life. That's but it is difficult to keep hunting with a camera. It's far more rewarding to hunt without a camera, but when I hunt without a camera, I have the same pitfalls that I began with, and that's coming home without the assets to really share the story with people who weren't there. And yeah, that's a big inspiration of mine, is to continue to tell stories and share stories with everyone at home. It has nothing to do with my personality. I don't need the accolades of people calling me a badass. That does nothing for my ego. I just enjoy being outside. I don't mind being cold, wet, and scared.
So one more question I kind of have, Donnie, going. I know you have talked about on other podcast platforms and stuff about how you love spending just a long period of time hunting a certain animal or in the wilderness compared to your 5 days or whatever, just because you feel that a lot deeper connection. But as a college student or as a young person working in industry, that really isn't always practical. I wonder what you recommend or what you would say to the college student or working person that simply cannot spend an extended period of time hunting a certain animal.
Sure. I'd say a couple of things. One is, you maybe can more than you think you can. Like I think there are a lot more options to how life can be sliced. I think we are convinced oftentimes that you go to high school, then you go to college, then if you're smart enough, you get a master's degree. But really what that means is, are you willing to continue to jump through the academic hoops? Then you get your master's degree. Or are you willing to jump through the academic hoops and contribute to science and get your PhD? And then you get married, have kids, get a job, and so on and so forth. But I think even for the working stiff or the college student, I think you could probably find more time than you realize. And that doesn't mean you have to go to the Arctic Circle for 30 days. But, I used to do trips when I was in college. When I was in high school, I would try to stack my days together. I would try to move tests closer together. I would move my classes around or whatever to try to get to where I had a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday every week or whatever. I'm making this up, but little things like that, because for me, that was more enjoyable to spend that much time afield rather than just going all the way up to Friday night and then having to be in there Monday morning. But I think there's a lot of different things in which people could do in their lives that would really open up the doors and could also increase their education. Going and volunteering at places, maybe doing an internship or contributing on a project, a habitat project in Alaska, for instance, and taking a leave of work and going and spending some time outdoors doing another type of project, and then maybe extending on the end of that project and doing a trip. I used to do that all the time. I would go to Alaska, work as a biologist, May through basically like end of September, early October, and then I would tack on a trip and I would go caribou hunting before I would come back and jump into my real job at home. And so I think there are options, but even if there aren't options, right? I say I like to go to the Arctic Circle for 30 days because, that immersion really opens my mind up. I start to see really a lot of things, grizzly bears, wolves, things like that really start, the more you're in a place, the more time you're in a place, you start to see these things and you start to really kind of develop a sense of the neighborhood, if you will. But that being said, my mornings here in Wisconsin, turkey hunting, or a November afternoon, climbing into an oak tree, really what I'm talking about is this idea of presence and mindfulness. And I used to do these things. I still do. I did a moose hunt last year in Alaska. It was disgusting. I did a 12-day or 14-day moose hunt in Alaska. And I swear to you, I was never there. A few days I remember I was there. A few hours I really remember. There's a couple of things that happened throughout the trip where I was really present, and I remember them, and I'm hanging my hat on those. But I let my mind get a hold of me on that trip, and I was there for 14 days, and I just was never there. I just let life in too much, and it took a hold of me. But really, that's kind of what I mean when I say go on an extended trip. You know, there's a big piece of that is that mindfulness, which the time allows. But going on a morning hunt or an afternoon hunt or a 1-day hunt, like if you're really present and you're really paying attention, and you kind of let yourself fall into wherever you are, whether that be 10 acres where you live, or the public land down the street, or a stream, or whatever, you know, you can really earn your time with mindfulness, no matter how long it is. But I would just urge you, if a 3-day trip could be a 5-day trip, or a 5-day trip could be a 7-day trip, or a 7-day trip could be a 10-day trip, I would just urge you to go on the longer side, and to also not let the constraints of modern society necessarily bog you down. You can't be reckless with your time. You can't be reckless with your jobs, and we all have bills to pay, and some of this stuff sounds better than it might execute. But there's certainly opportunities, you know. And I remember when I was in college, and I'm not boasting about this to say that you know that people should do this, but I remember friends of mine, serious friends of mine, that were very accomplished, whether they were medical doctors or they were getting degrees in technology and doing very well for themselves as young people. I remember a couple of my friends sat me down. They're like, "Hey, look, man, like, you're hunting too much. You're spending too much time in Alaska. You are, you know, like, you need to buckle down and look at your studies more, you know." And I remember going to Canada a couple of times when I was in college, snow goose hunting. And while the other guys that I was snow goose hunting would be up at night having a beer and playing cards and laughing and stuff, like, I'd go back to my tent and do homework so that I could be there snow goose hunting. And that's really what I'm talking about. I never partied when I was in college. I didn't party when I was in high school. And I had several other buddies of mine that were like, "Oh, you're so lucky you get to go to Alaska every year." And I could never afford that. And yeah, but these guys were out with their buddies drinking in the bars Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and they weren't willing to give that up. And they're spending hundreds of dollars every week doing that stuff. And I wasn't. And so going to Alaska once or twice a year, every year, for me was no problem at all. And yeah, so I think it's a mindset. You know, I'm mostly talking about mindfulness and presence. You can turn a minute into something that's really something you can dig deep on, whether you see a hummingbird or whether you're just watching the sun come up through the leaves or whatever it is. But, you know, stamp that thing and tuck it away in your mind, and don't let anyone ever take it away.
Right. Yeah, that explains a lot, and that was a great answer. Eric, did you have another question, or did you ask?
I was just wondering if you could put us in your head for a minute, and on one of these really long excursions that you're out doing, it just the most inspirational moment you've ever had on that, and sort of what was wrapped around it.
Yeah, that's that's a good question. That's a big question. You know, I'll tell you this. This is the most. I've had multiple inspirational moments on trips, whether it's you know, just feeling like a human being, feeling like a wild animal, sitting up on a mountain watching caribou migrate by, or watching black bears hunt, or grizzly bears feed or dig for ground squirrels. I've seen a lot of things that just made me feel, you know, Aboriginal, or you know, native, if you will. Made me feel alive, made me feel like I was doing and living exactly how a human being should live. But I'll tell you this, the most present I've ever been in my life was 2 years ago in October, and I was in the Chugach Mountains of Alaska. It was October 8th. It was blowing probably 40 to 60 miles an hour, snowing, and I was stalking a doll sheep with my bow, and I had to go way up around this mountain basin in knee-deep snow, and the last bit of the stalk that I had to do, I was about 80 yards from the ram, and I had to cross these two cliffs that were covered in ice, and if I would have slipped, I would have lost my life. In both of these sections, I probably would have slipped probably 400 or 500 feet with no opportunity to stop myself. It's just literally a sheer slope that ended in about a 1,500-foot cliff, literally straight down to rocks at the bottom. And I had one hand because I had my bow in my other hand, and the photographer that I was working with, William Altman, he had one hand because he had a camera in the other hand. And just our quiet conversation, talking each other and looking at our boots, and just that hyper focus of looking at the sole of our boots and how that was touching the edge, and we crossed this. It took everything for us to cross this. By the time we crossed it, I looked across the canyon, and one of our photographers, who we left behind with a big lens to film the sheep from another angle, he was signaling us, kind of like SOS, and we're only a couple hundred yards apart, but we could barely find each other through the blizzard, and he communicated to us that the ram had left, and I kind of felt this wind. We had this massive wind that was coming off of the Turnagain Arm, which is a piece of the Cook Inlet, the big piece of ocean that comes up into Anchorage. And the wind was just smashing us from the west, traveling to the east, like 50, 60 miles an hour. But there was one little half a second break. It was just, and it went, and the cliff that we were crossing was this big bowl. And so he had messaged us, and so so now we had to cross those two cliffs to go back. But now we didn't have the excitement of actually getting close to this large ram. And so we went back, and he showed us the footage of that ram. And it made me, this sounds really funny because I was trying to kill him, but it made me really proud of him, the ram, because he was laying there. He's massive ram. He's 10 or 11 years old. And he's laying there in the driving snow. And for him, this is, a Wednesday. And he got our wind, and he tilted his horns back, and he looked up the hill, and he stood up with total confidence, and he just turned and walked away into the blizzard and just disappeared. And it was very inspiring for me to see him get a leg up on us and to win that kind of that stock. His senses beat us. Like, it was just really cool. And like I said, I was oddly proud of him that he caught us. The jig was up, and just the way he walked away was such poise. And when I see these things, I get so inspired by them. And I've had other instances. I was in Nevada a few years ago, and I was sitting there with my compound, and I don't have an arrow on this bow, but it was this bow, and I was just sitting there, and I was holding my bow like this, and I had my quiver was on this side, and I had red fletching sticking up, and this hummingbird came and just was like just checking me out, and it landed right on my red fletchings, thinking it was a flower. And it's things like that I find really moving. Spending time with wolves. I've spent a summer with a pack of wolves. I've been surrounded by multiple packs of wolves, and seeing, sometimes I get made fun of a little bit, which is fine, that I'm not a wolf killer. I could have killed probably 30 wolves in my life with my bow. And I just haven't. It's just not for me. It's difficult for me to explain, but when they look at you, and there's a lot of sense in their eyes, I'm not against against killing wolves. I think we should kill wolves. I think wolves need to be managed. I think it's fantastic that Wisconsin is allowing some hunting for them right now. It's not for me, but yeah, those are the types of things, Eric, that have just always really moved me. You know, like when you get these wolves coming in and you're seeing their body and their posture, and they're talking to one another, and they kind of do this little communication, and for lack of a better term, they're kind of hunting you, but really what they're doing is just checking you out. I think they pretty well know I'm not a good food source for them. But just seeing the emotion, and then 3 guys hiking back to camp, and not a word is exchanged. You just hear your boots on the gravel and through the tundra, and you get back to the teepee and you start a wood fire and you make dinner, and it's half hour into dinner before anybody talks, and those are the things that I really wish I could do with everyone. And your question before is really inspiring me too, because I really would love the idea of taking kids or people hunting that really have very little opportunity to hunt. And I don't know that I'd want to do it on a large scale, if I'm being honest, but I really would like to introduce. I love the idea of sharing my lifestyle with people. It's if I were a billionaire, that's what I would do.
I'd be happy to try and facilitate something like that, and work with you to make something like that a reality. It's something near and dear to my own heart as well. Really inspiring story. I have one follow-up question to go to the other end of things, way back to the beginning. Can you share a story about when you were first getting into hunting that was just like it was the hook that got set?
Yeah, for sure. I have there were multiple things that were the hook, but I'll tell you a quick story, and then I'll tell you something that was quite interesting that happened to me later in life. The hook for me was, I begged my father, and I mean, like, for the most part, had to literally grab my dad, twist his head off his shoulders, put him in the car, load the gear, literally force him to take me hunting. But we lived in Connecticut, and we drove out into the country to this little woodlot, and we were hunting gray squirrels. And I remember driving there, and it was in these big valleys, and really pretty farms out there, red barns. The leaves were at peak colors, and which if you guys don't know, in places like Connecticut, New Hampshire, southern Maine, that means a lot of maple trees. So the woods are just, yellows and fire engine red, and sun-kissed orange. It's just spectacular. And I just remember driving there, and we saw this farm, and there was a flock of wild turkeys out in this farm, and I'd not seen that many wild turkeys. If that might even been the first time I saw a flock of wild turkeys, and I saw a white-tailed deer, and I just felt like I was driving in a painting. And I say that because all of my dad's books that I fell in love with all had these beautiful paintings in them, and I would just stare at these paintings, whether it was of, I remember them of grizzly bears and of moose and of doll sheep and white-tailed deer and mule deer, and so I just felt like I was driving through a painting. And then I remember when we were in the woods, I saw a group of deer coming, and I was like, hey, and we're sitting on a log. My dad was, he's not a lazy man, but he was lazy in the sense of he would not put forth much effort. He just wanted to sit there on a log with a gun. And, if an animal showed up, that was when you engaged with it, but that was the hunt. And I saw these deer coming through the woods, and so I had to talk him through seeing them, and he finally saw them. And then I realized, like, we would walk around, and as we were walking around, we wouldn't see that much, because animals were seeing us. And so we sat down on a log. So then I started strategically sitting us on a log and just telling my dad, like, hey, just sit here quiet. I'm going to go sit over here quiet. And then we started seeing squirrels, killing squirrels. And he was always shooting. Like, I was never even the shooter. He would kill the squirrels. Then we go home and we'd skin them. And then we'd eat them. Like, I'd skin the whole thing. I'd skin the whole squirrel out, and I'd get it down to 2 hindquarters, 2 front quarters, and then basically like the spinal column, so that we could eat the meat on either side. And we'd fry them up just like you would chicken wings, and they're fantastic. And I just remember that being so incredibly rewarding. But the the aha moment really for me, Eric, was all the books that I was reading. Like I had this aha moment long before I ever took a step in the woods. But I remember when we drove down that road that day and seeing the old farms and the flock of turkeys, and I remember thinking that, oh, those authors weren't liars. Those paintings that they had in the books, like these were things that these men had explored. And I remember thinking like this, if I were to write a story about today, I would paint this picture and I wouldn't be lying either. I would really have a story to tell. And I thought that was very moving. And the second thing I'll tell you is National Geographic contacted me years ago to do a TV show. They wanted to do a TV show with me, and they pitched me all these ideas that I refused to do, finding Bigfoot and all these things that were ridiculous that people probably find very entertaining. And I turned it all down. And they said, well, is there a TV show that you'd like to do? And I said, yes, I have an idea. And I put together this deck and it was awesome. And I can't believe they didn't pop on it, but they didn't. But I said, I want to go live with different Aboriginal tribes around the world, Eskimos, Athabascan Indians, Cheyenne Indians, the Gurung honey collectors in Nepal, all these different places. I want to go live with all these tribes. I didn't want to hunt, but I wanted to go live with all these hunting and gathering tribes. And I wanted to learn from them how they hold their spear, how they make their spear, what their huts are like, the snakes they have to look out for, the ants that they have to look out for, the plants that they have to look out for. I just wanted to learn from them, and I wanted to film it all. And then I wanted to kind of put together a behind the scenes of what it takes to film in these areas. And then I also wanted to, because I wanted to give National Geographic a lot of content. And then I wanted to really film my experience with these Native people. And they said, well, we're kind of against hunting. And I said, what do you mean you're against hunting? And I said, I see hunting on your guys' channels all the time. And they said, yeah, but it's always just Native people. And I just thought that was such a farce, that that's the only type of hunting that they would allow, because some of it was very unbecoming. And I brought this up to them. I'd watched a Native kid stand on a wolverine. He shot a wolverine in the back, and he stood on a wolverine and shot it in the head, and he spun it out. And even on the show, I think he talked about that he was going to sell the skin so he could buy cigarettes or something like that. And they were all about it because he was a Native kid, but I thought it was really gross. But anyway, we had this big meeting, and she asked me, she goes, well, Donnie, can you tell us why you hunt? And I said, oh yeah, for sure, I can tell you. It's super easy. And when I went to answer it, I couldn't. I had no idea why it is that I hunted. Literally no idea, other than I could talk about why this, sunrise is really pretty, and I like to eat deer meat, and I like shooting my bow, and I give her all these, I could give her all these ingredients, but I couldn't really understand the why. And so her question really pushed me into really going and looking and educating myself and understanding why it is that we are hunters and fishermen and growers and gatherers, and it was very rewarding to go and kind of discover the answer. And I'm continuously educating myself on it, and so it was really kind of interesting. And that's why we put together, we have that little short film called Who We Are. That was for National Geographic, to tell them why it is that I hunted. And then I actually have another one of those coming out in this next month, kind of an updated version of Who We Are, that we're releasing in conjunction with a company that I work with called Hanwag Boots. It's a German boot maker, but they're just a really soulful company, and they're not. They greatly support hunting, but in a particular manner, and so they just wanted to work with us on this project of kind of helping hunters find their voice to describe why it is that they hunt, and so I do so in a manner of which telling people why it is that I hunt. And so, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say my aha moment came from Jack O'Connor's Big Game Animals of North America, a book that he penned probably in the 60s. He was a literary professor at the University of Arizona. He's dead now, but he was a fantastic writer. He's, him being a literary professor, he wrote so beautifully, and in his books is just, you should read. I recommend everyone read his stories. He's just such a beautiful writer.
Yeah, awesome, Ben. That was a fantastic answer to the question. I don't know if you had a follow up, Eric. If not,
Oh, I just wanted to say thanks for being a great role model for all these kids.
Mhm.
Thanks for being an awesome human being. And thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us, because that's probably the biggest gift you can ever give anyone.
Well, I appreciate that, Eric. It's very, very kind of you to say. And I mentioned this to Sam. Not that I'm an important person, but anytime you guys want to do this, I'm happy to do this. If I'm in town and not out on a project, I'd be happy to do this. I don't care if you guys want to devote one to caribou hunting, or you want to devote one to hunter recruitment, or whatever it is that you want to do. I'll prepare the best I can, and I'm happy to. I think this is a vital portion of my job, and in talking with people like you is that's just very, very, very rewarding for me.
Well, we will certainly take you up on that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much, Donnie. It's been great. Thank you for donating an hour of your time to us, and hopefully we could get you back sometime in the future to talk to us some more.
Sure. Is this a video that you guys are going to post?
We're gonna post it just to our private clubs group.
If you want, so I'm recording it right now onto my own machine here. I'm happy to share it with you and your people. And
yeah, if you want to,
Sam can get you the particulars to get in contact with me, and I can figure out how to get it to you. That's fine.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. And I was just going to say, if you want us to post it on our side or link to it, and then link to your guys' club, just to give some greater awareness to your guys' club and the things that you're working on, I'd be happy to do that.
Sure, that would be great. I'll get in contact with Carrie and can forward her the information and the video recording.
Fantastic.
Awesome. But thank you very much, Donnie, and thank you all for attending as well.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.